So there's a new all-time low album. For those who haven't seen my hour-long review of Future Hearts, I am a big fan of the band, especially their albums The Party Scene, So Wrong It's Right, Nothing Personal and Don't Panic. But their last album, Future Hearts, was just not good. And since making that review 2 years ago, my hatred for it has only grown. Apart from a few really solid pop-punk tracks, the album seemed to just be a collection of really bland, uninteresting and badly produced pop music. In hindsight, the fact that John Feldmann produced it does not help its terrible and bland sound. Fast forward 2 years and they have a brand new album showing the band fully transition from pop-punk to pop-rock. And how does it compare to their previous work? Well, I definitely like it a lot more than most people do. Although critically the album isn't too badly received, a lot of all-time low fans hate this album as if they didn't see this new sound coming at all. To be honest, this is exactly what I predicted their next album would be after hearing Future Hearts. But the thing is, compared to the pop tracks on that album, here things are more refined and never really stray away from the same formula, which I can understand being a huge problem for some people. But I'd much rather get 10 tracks that sound similar over a few really solid tracks and a bunch of weird songs that the band experimented on that just don't work. Last Young Renegade feels like the natural evolution for the band's slow transition into pop music, but I think everyone's big problem with the album is that only half of the album is actually genuinely great. And considering this album is 10 tracks long, that doesn't really bode too well. But that's not to say there's any songs that I think are completely terrible. There's no tracks like Dancing with a Wolf or Edge of Tonight on this album, luckily. The bad tracks are just forgettable and boring. These tracks include Drugs and Candy, Nightmares, Dark Side of Your Room and Ground Control. They aren't offensively bad, they just don't hit with me at all. They don't have the catchy, fantastic choruses of the 5 singles. Yes, they did release half the album as singles. They lack the punch that they really need to help them stand out. The singles for this album are so good that these tracks just feel like they stopped trying because they didn't think they'd ever be able to top it all. The band followed the weird Fueled by Ramen trend by completely changing their sound to a very 80s synth-pop inspired sound. The same thing we saw bands like Panic! At the Disco do, and even Paramore do with their newest album. God, I really hope Basement and Swimmers don't do this too. And there are tracks where this sound really works. Tracks like Last Young Renegade and Dirty Laundry pull it off perfectly. And there are tracks like Good Times and Life of the Party that blend this sound with a modern day top 40s pop sound. And there are also a lot of moments that are reminiscent of the many indie pop rock bands that seem to be inescapable if you're a fan of indie music. And this sound is cool and creates this very slick, polished and glossy sound that makes the better tracks at least essentially ear candy. The first single for the album, Dirty Laundry, is possibly one of the best examples of how good the production work can get on this album. Although I wasn't a fan of the track at first, it grew on me and now I think it is really, really good. It has a very hypnotic guitar line and atmospheric yet powerful and raw vocals from Alex Gaskarth. It's definitely incredibly refreshing to hear after having to sit through Future Hearts the amount of times I had to for that review. The track is about looking back at a past relationship and accepting the mistakes that both people in the relationship have made. Although the Dirty Laundry looks good on you line at first was a bit cringy to me, as soon as I rolled with it, it actually became one of my favourite lyrics on the entire album. The chorus is incredibly catchy and anthemic, the instrumentation is beautiful and powerful. The track is just a fantastic piece of electronic pop rock, easily one of the best on the album. The album is a concept album talking about the complete opposite sides of youth that the band have looked at previously. Instead of trying to act young still, they kind of move on and look at their youth from a nostalgic perspective, but also explore the darker sides to each good moment that they previously ignored. The track Life of the Party is a perfect example of this, a song which is pretty much the hangover after every single party song, talking about waking up with all these passed out people, looking back on the night of fun that they just had and wondering whether it was all worth it. The track has one of the best and most catchy choruses on the album. It's an explosive yet restrained chorus with Alex singing at the top of his vocal range. He sings about how the party lifestyle isn't for him and how he feels like he's kind of lost himself into it. By far one of the darkest songs lyrically and musically on the album. It has kind of a dark and sinister undertone to the whole track, which really sets it apart from the other tracks on the album. This track is by far one of my favourites on the album and one of my favourites the band has actually done since Don't Panic. The track Nice to Know You is the only track on the album that is reminiscent of the band's earlier stuff. It sounds like a song you'd expect to hear from one of their first few albums, but with a more electronic and effect-heavy sound. And it's a really solid track. It's a track about being young and having fun. It's placed on the album before Live at the Party, and I think the contrast between the two songs are fantastic, with each song being the literal opposite of each other. But by far my favourite track on the whole album is the title track, Last Young Renegade. To be honest, this has quickly become one of my favourite tracks the band have ever done. I've listened to it hundreds of times since it came out, and I'm still not sick of it. I find myself singing the chorus to myself all the time. The track is about the last person that you're in love with before you make the move into adulthood. A track that is easily the most mature on the album. The instrumentation is fantastic. The guitars blend in with the atmospheric pulsing synths beautifully. The drum lines are very pounding and add loads of power to the track. The melodies are fantastic and incredibly catchy. Alex's voice sounds incredible on the track. It sounds a lot more mature and grown up than previously. With this track and really the whole album in general, it feels like the band are ready to grow up and move away from that era of their youth that they sung about previously. The idea of naming the album after this track was fantastic, basically saying that this is the band saying farewell to being young and accepting that they have to grow up eventually. And I really commend the band for doing this instead of doing what most pop punk bands do and try to hang on to their youth well into their 40s. I really like the concept of the album as a whole. I think it's a smart idea, and when the album is at its best, the album is really well executed. But there are a few too many moments that just feel like filler, and that really does ruin things for me. And it's a real shame because the tracks that are good, I absolutely love. Although I think some people may enjoy the filler tracks on the album still, for me they're not really the best that I think the band can actually do. But I will admit that it's possible that these tracks may actually grow on me. Dirty Laundry grew on me massively, and hey, I originally didn't like the last track, Afterglow, but after a few listens it really grew on me. So maybe after a bunch of listens I'll actually fall in love with this album. But either way, I do really like this album, and it's a definite improvement over Future Hearts, which honestly I think deserves lower than the 5 out of 10 that I gave it in my review. If you go into this album hoping that it will sound exactly like their older stuff, you're gonna be very disappointed. This album is far from pop punk, but if you embrace it and accept the change, I think you'll really dig it. So for that reason, I give All Time Low's Last Young Renegade a 7.5 out of 10.